Chum Bucket was quiet, unusually quiet. Outside, the water of Bikini Bottom drifted slow and heavy, carrying the soft hum of distant currents. The streets were nearly empty. A few jellyfish floated lazily through the twilight blue, their faint pink glow painting ripples against the Chum Bucket's dull metal walls. Inside, the silence felt different tonight, not empty, not lonely, but soft, like the ocean itself had decided to rest. Plankton stood behind the counter, a tiny green figure in a vast silver room. The smell of warm oil hung faintly in the air, mingled with something new, something pleasant. A hint of kelp tea, a trace of sea salt bread cooling near the oven. For the first time in a long time, there were no sparks flying from Karen's machinery, no bubbling vats, no angry muttering about crabs or secret formulas. The only sound was the low hum of a small lamp flickering near the cash register, casting a pool of gentle amber light that spread across the floor like a calm tide. Plankton climbed up onto his little stool and placed both hands on the counter. His antennae drooped slightly, relaxed, his single eye half closed, watching the shadows sway. It was peaceful. Too peaceful, maybe. But peace was something he hadn't felt in a long time. He looked toward Karen's screen. She wasn't projecting any plans or blueprints tonight. Instead, her display glowed a muted blue, a soft wave animation pulsing slowly, like breathing. "Karen," Plankton said, his voice small but steady. "You ever think maybe we were trying too hard?" A pause. Then her voice smooth, almost sleepy. "Trying too hard, dear? That's not like you." Plankton chuckled quietly, tapping the counter with one tiny finger. "Yeah, maybe that's the point." He leaned back, thinking of the old days, the chaos, the noise, the endless shouting about the Krabby Patty formula. Every plan ended the same way. Explosion, failure, humiliation. He used to storm around the lab for hours, shouting into the air about injustice and destiny. Now those memories floated by like bubbles, distant, harmless. He looked at the sign above the door. The paint was new, bright coral pink. The words shimmered softly in the light. The Chum Bucket Cafe. It had taken him days to change it. The first time he tried, the brush was too big, and the paint spilled all over his arm. He'd cursed, shouted, even thrown the brush. But eventually he laughed. He had laughed at himself, something he hadn't done in years. He remembered that laugh now. It echoed faintly in the quiet, soft and round. Outside, the seafloor drifted with specks of light, floating like lazy fireflies. The whole world seemed to move slower here. Plankton's eye wandered to the menu board. The items were handwritten uneven, a little crooked, but full of charm. Chum bisque, 3 sand dollars, warm kelp, bread 2, jelly tea 4, smile discount free. He smiled faintly. The smile discount had been Karen's idea. If you can't make money, she had teased, maybe you can make someone's day. At first he'd rolled his eye, but tonight, as he looked at the board, it felt right. He walked slowly across the counter, his tiny steps making soft clicks against the metal. He paused near the window, resting a hand on the glass. Outside, the moonlight filtered through the ocean's surface, turning everything silver blue. He could see the faint outline of the crusty crab in the distance. Plankton wandered toward the back of the Chum Bucket, his tiny steps tapping softly against the counter. Each sound echoed lightly in the still air, blending with the gentle hum of the building's old systems. He paused near the back door and looked out the small, round window. Beyond the glass, the ocean drifted in soft blues and greens, thick ribbons of current swaying lazily. Tiny plankton clouds floated by his own kind, drifting without thought or worry. He thought about how strange it was to be awake when everything else seemed to dream. The Chum Bucket had always been noisy, whirring machines, electric sparks, the clang of half-finished inventions. But now there was only calm. The silence wrapped around him like a blanket, warm and alive. He didn't realize how much he'd missed it until now. He moved back toward the front, glancing at the small menu board. The words chum, stew, fresh, and kind were scribbled in uneven chalk letters. Plankton chuckled quietly. He had written that earlier, right before he decided to stop thinking about crabs, stop thinking about secret formulas, stop thinking about losing. For once, there was no plan. Only a night that didn't demand anything of him. Karen's soft hum filled the space again, her voice coming from the main console behind the counter. "Sheldon, your energy readings are low. Did you skip your dinner again?" Plankton smiled, leaning against a napkin holder twice his size. "Dinner can wait. I'm just listening." "Listening?" Karen asked, her tone curious. "To the quiet. It's strange, isn't it? It's like the ocean forgot how to argue with me." Karen's screen flickered with a soft teal hue, her way of smiling. "That's because you're not shouting at it tonight." Plankton laughed gently, a short, genuine sound. It had been a long time since laughter had come without bitterness. He glanced up at the small hanging bulb above the counter. It swayed faintly, casting ripples of light across the walls. The glow reminded him of jellyfish, of the slow pulse of their bodies in the dark sea. He had always envied their simplicity. They didn't care about success or failure. They just drifted, shining for the sake of shining. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Maybe that's the secret, Karen. To just glow without a reason." The Chum Bucket creaked slightly as the ocean current brushed against its metal frame. The sound was soothing, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Plankton climbed up to the countertop, stretching out on his back, staring at the ceiling. Above him, the light bulb hummed quietly. The ceiling fan, long broken, hung still. He could almost imagine it spinning slowly, pushing gentle waves of air through the room. His tiny eyes followed a faint line of condensation trailing down the wall. It looked like a river, flowing toward the floor. He thought of how often he had looked at this same ceiling in frustration. Nights when he couldn't sleep, drawing blueprints and revenge plans. Every night had been about what he didn't have. But tonight, he didn't want to think about that. He just wanted to exist. The silence deepened, filled with faint sounds of the sea outside, the distant whoosh of a current, the tick of bubbles rising past the windows, the echo of some unseen creature calling softly into the distance. Everything was calm and connected. Plankton closed his eyes for a moment and let the sounds blend together. The Chum Bucket wasn't a restaurant right now. It was a shell floating in the ocean's dream. After a while, he opened his eyes again. The light from the single lamp had dimmed, its warmth spreading gently over the countertop. He could see the outlines of the tables, the soft shimmer of the utensils, the faint sparkle of glass jars lined neatly on the shelves. Everything was too clean for the Chum Bucket, he thought with a grin. He remembered the last time he had truly cleaned it. It had been years ago, back when he believed that maybe, just maybe, the next customer would finally change everything. But they never came. Not until now, in this dream, this quiet version of reality, where peace replaced chaos. Karen's voice broke the stillness again, low and affectionate. "You know, you've been quiet for exactly 17 minutes and 43 seconds. That's a record, dear." Plankton smiled without opening his eyes. "I'm trying something new. It's called not overthinking." "I've run diagnostics on that before," Karen teased. You usually last about 10 seconds. Maybe tonight's different, he murmured, smiling faintly. Maybe tonight I'll set a new record. He turned over, propping himself up on one arm, gazing across the restaurant floor. The shadows moved softly, the flickering light, like slow waves rippling over sand. There was something sacred in it, something small but powerful. On the counter beside him lay an old notepad filled with half-baked ideas. Blueprints for burger-making robots, formulas, half-written insults aimed at crabs. He flipped through it lazily. Each page felt like an echo of another life. He tore out one page, allowing a messy drawing of a ray gun, and folded it neatly. He set it aside and whispered, "No more weapons, no more stealing, just cooking." Karen's screen dimmed to a golden tone. "Cooking, huh? I can get used to that." "I think I can too," Plankton said, his voice calm. The lamp flickered softly again, sending warm ripples across the metal floor. Plankton jumped down and began rearranging the nearby tables, slowly, methodically, as though he were rebuilding the Chum Bucket from scratch. He moved one napkin holder slightly to the left, adjusted a chair so it faced the door, wiped the counter with a small piece of cloth he dragged along. Every small act felt meaningful, like polishing a memory that had been buried too long under frustration. He didn't rush. Each sound, the slide of a chair, the creak of wood, the tiny thump of his feet added to the rhythm of the night. It wasn't work. It was meditation. The ocean outside grew darker, and with it, the glow of the Chum Bucket grew warmer. From a distance, it might have looked like a small lantern sitting on the seafloor, glowing gently against the blue-black void. Plankton stood still for a while, admiring it through the window. He saw his reflection, tiny, green, a little tired, but smiling. He didn't see a villain anymore, only saw a caretaker. He turned back toward Karen. "You know, Karen, maybe I don't need the Krabby Patty formula after all. Maybe the secret's been here the whole time." Karen tilted her screen slightly. "Inside you? Inside us?" he said softly. The words hung in the air like bubbles, delicate, slow, sincere. Outside, the currents grew quieter. A single jellyfish drifted past the window, its light flickering like a candle in a slow motion. Plankton watched it for a long time until it disappeared into the darkness. "Like a peaceful little thing," he murmured. "Doesn't need fame. Doesn't need fortune. Just floats." "You could learn from it," Karen said playfully. "I think I already am." He climbed back onto the counter, resting again. The Chum Bucket hummed with low, steady energy. Everything about the space, the light, the silence, even the soft smell of old chum and salt felt comforting. He closed his eyes, breathing in the ocean's rhythm. In his mind, he could almost hear the gentle laughter of unseen customers, not mockery, not chaos, just soft, friendly noise. Maybe someday that sound would be real. Maybe tomorrow the door would open, and instead of rejection, there would be someone curious, someone kind, someone hungry for peace, not power. For the first time, he didn't dread tomorrow. The night continued, still and infinite, wrapping the Chum Bucket in quiet serenity. The minutes melted into each other until time itself felt like a slow current. The Chum Bucket no longer seemed like a building, but like a living shell breathing in rhythm with the sea. The glow from the hanging lamp had settled into a soft amber haze. Dust motes, tiny bits of sand and salt, drifted through the light, turning lazily as though they were caught in an invisible tide. Plankton stayed very still. He didn't want to disturb the quiet. Every movement felt like a ripple in a calm pond. He simply watched the slow dance of light and shadow around him. From somewhere deep within the structure came a faint ping, a droplet of water falling from a pipe. Then another. The rhythm joined the hum of the current outside, forming a kind of heartbeat. The Chum Bucket was alive again, but in a different way than before, not buzzing with invention, not roaring with machines, but alive in silence, breathing, resting. He hopped down from the counter and wandered toward the back again. Along the hallway, the walls were lined with tools he had once used to build schemes, small wrenches, welding goggles, tangled wires. He ran a tiny hand along them, feeling the cool metal beneath a thin coat of dust. "All these years," he whispered, "I thought these were my trophies. Turns out they were just noise." He reached the door to the old lab. The keypad blinked faintly, its red light the only bright spot in the dim corridor. Plankton pressed his eye to the scanner, and the door hissed open with a soft sigh. Inside, everything was just as he had left it. Tables cluttered with half-built robots, shelves full of jars and vials, sketches scattered like fallen leaves. But now the chaos seemed small, almost gentle, like the relics of a childhood hobby. He stepped closer to one of the blueprints pinned to the wall. It was labeled Plan Hash 942, Formula Retrieval Drone Mark V. His handwriting looked so eager, so certain. He tore the page down carefully, folded it once, and placed it in the trash bin. "Rest easy, old dream," he said softly. "You've done enough damage." A faint smile tugged at him. He walked over to Karen's backup screen sitting on the far table. Dust clung to its corners, and the screen flickered weakly when he tapped it. "Remember this one, Karen?" he called. "You used to crash every time I overloaded you with formulas." Her voice carried gently through the intercom. "Oh, I remember. You'd blame me instead of the 300 calculations you made me do at once." Plankton chuckled. "You were always the patient one." "Someone had to be," she teased. He ran a small cloth across the surface of the backup screen until it gleamed. The faint reflection of his eye stared back at him, older, calmer. There was still ambition there, but it had softened into curiosity rather than hunger. He glanced toward a nearby shelf and noticed something he hadn't touched in years, a jar labeled Prototype #1 Chum with Heart. He remembered making it as a joke, adding a dash of sweetness to an otherwise bitter recipe, thinking no one would ever want it. But tonight, under the warm light, it looked almost beautiful. The pinkish chum shimmered faintly as if alive. He picked up the jar and held it close. The glass was cool and smooth. "Maybe this is the real success," he murmured. "Finding something gentle and something ugly." He carried the jar out to the main room and set it on the counter beside the lamp. It glowed softly, adding another layer of warmth to the space. Outside the window, a faint motion caught his eye. Tiny specks of light drifted through the water, bioluminescent plankton, swirling in gentle spirals. They gathered near the Chum Bucket sign, outlining the letters with a subtle shim. He climbed up to the window ledge and pressed his face close. The ocean seemed alive with the quiet celebration. Maybe, he thought, the sea could feel his calm too. He spoke softly, his words forming little bubbles that drifted upward. "I never noticed how beautiful you are when you're not fighting me." The lights outside shimmered as if responding. The whole seafloor around the Chum Bucket glowed faintly now, like a quiet dream of morning. Plankton turned away from the window and surveyed the room again. He could see how different it looked under this light. The metal walls that once felt cold now looked like polished coral. The tables gleamed faintly, and the air smelled faintly of salt and something sweet, almost like kelp tea. He decided to make himself a small cup. It wasn't easy. The kettle was large, and his hands were tiny. But he managed, slowly and carefully, dragging a stool across the floor and climbing up. The kettle clicked softly as it warmed. Steam began to curl upward in thin silver ribbons. As he waited, he listened to the ocean again. Somewhere far away, a whale sang, a long, low sound that vibrated through the metal. It was mournful, but soft, like a lullaby. Plankton closed his eyes and let the sound pass through him. Each note felt like it carried the weight of the sea, yet it didn't crush him. It lifted him somehow, making him feel part of something vast and kind. When the kettle whistled softly, he poured the water into a tiny shell cup, letting the steam rise and twist in the golden light. He sat on the edge of the counter, legs dangling, sipping quietly. The warmth spread through him in slow waves. He thought about all the times he had sat here before, cold, furious, planning revenge. Now he sat in the same spot. But the world had changed completely, and he hadn't moved at all. Maybe the real change was inside him. He set the cup down, half full, and leaned back. Karen's main screen flickered to life again. "You look peaceful," she said softly. "I think I am," he replied. "It's strange. I used to think peace meant giving up. Now it feels like winning." "You always did like surprising outcomes," she said with a digital chuckle. Plankton smiled. "Maybe the biggest surprise is that I can feel happy without stealing anything." The screen's light dimmed again, becoming part of the room's glow. For a while, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of the sea moved through the silence, gentle currents brushing the metal walls, the occasional pop of a distant bubble. After some time, Plankton hopped down and walked to the door. He opened it slightly, letting a faint current sweep through. The temperature shifted, a soft, cool breeze that carried the scent of open water. He stood in the doorway, looking out across the dim expanse of the seafloor. In the distance, faint outlines of coral rose like sleeping mountains. Tiny lights moved between them, fish, jellyfish, drifting creatures. Everything was slow, deliberate, unhurried. For the first time in forever, Plankton didn't feel small out there. He felt like part of the same rhythm. Every motion had purpose. Every silence meant something. He stayed there for a long time, breathing in the quiet. The door creaked gently as it swayed. The ocean exhaled, and the Chum Bucket seemed to exhale with it. He turned back toward the interior again and whispered, "Karen, if this is a dream, I don't want to wake up." Her voice came through softly. "Then don't. Let it last a little longer." Plankton nodded. He closed the door, leaving only a thin glow from the outside streaming through the round window. He looked around once more, the lamp, the jar, the cup, the quiet machinery sleeping in the background, and felt a rare, deep contentment settle into him. He climbed back onto the counter, curled up near the lamp, and watched the golden light dance across the surface of the jar he'd placed there earlier. The gentle shimmer painted his reflection across the glass, small, imperfect, but peaceful. He whispered again, barely audible, "Maybe this is what success sounds like. Not applause, just quiet." The Chum Bucket agreed with a soft groan from its walls, like an old friend stretching in its sleep. The sea outside pulsed once more with faint light, and everything fell still again. Plankton drifted on the edge of sleep. The Chum Bucket's low hum had blended perfectly with the heartbeat of the ocean outside. Each vibration through the walls felt like a lullaby from the sea itself. He wasn't sure how much time had passed when he noticed the faintest change in the light. The golden lamp above him no longer shone alone. A soft bluish shimmer crept through the front window, hesitant at first, then a little stronger, like moonlight filtering through a curtain. Plankton sat up slowly. The glow rippled gently across the floor, moving like a living thing. He climbed down from the counter and approached the window, his tiny footsteps muffled by the warm hush of the room. Outside, he saw them, a small group of jellyfish drifting close to the glass. They pulsed in soft rhythm, leaving trails of pale lavender light behind them. Their bodies expanded and contracted like slow breathing, as if the entire ocean were exhaling in time with them. "Well," he whispered, smiling, "seems I have company." The jellyfish hovered near the sign that read, "Open for Smiles." Their glow shimmered across the letters, making them look freshly painted. Then, with almost curious grace, one of the jellyfish floated closer, bumping gently against the doorbell. Ding. The sound was tiny, but it echoed like music in the empty room. Plankton blinked. "Are you, coming in?" The door slid open with a faint hiss, as though the building itself had been waiting for this moment. The jellyfish glided inside one after another, their tendrils trailing lines of light that curled softly through the air. The Chum Bucket interior transformed. The amber light mixed with the blue shimmer of the jellyfish, turning the space into a dream of dusk and dawn combined. Shadows melted away. The walls looked softer, almost alive. Plankton stood in the middle of the floor, looking up in wonder. He had spent years chasing attention, customers, validation. Yet this quiet visitation, this small, wordless arrival filled him with more joy than all the applause he'd ever imagined. "Welcome," he said quietly. "I don't have menus printed, but you're free to float." The jellyfish responded by pulsing brighter, as if bowing politely. They drifted above the tables, their lights swaying like lanterns at a gentle festival. Karen's voice crackled softly from the console. "I'm detecting guests, non-paying but luminous." Plankton laughed. "Let them stay. They brighten the place." "You never say that about customers," she teased. "Maybe because they never glowed before," he replied. The jellyfish began to move in a slow spiral around the center of the room. Each pulse of their light matched the quiet rhythm of the sea outside. Plankton could almost hear a faint music forming, not from speakers or instruments, but from the hum of the ocean, mingling with the flicker of their glow. He climbed onto one of the stools to get a better view. The air felt different now, cooler but kind, scented faintly of salt and something floral, the way kelp smells after rain. The largest jellyfish drifted near him and paused. For a heartbeat, Plankton could see his reflection in its translucent surface, tiny, curious, peaceful. The jellyfish lowered itself slightly as though bowing. Plankton placed a hand on the counter. "I never imagined success would look like this," he said softly. "What does it look like?" Karen asked. He gazed at the glowing visitors. "Like forgiveness." For a while, no one spoke. The Chum Bucket had become a sanctuary of slow light and gentle sound. Every flicker on the wall seemed to erase an old memory of failure, washing it clean. The jellyfish drifted closer to the ceiling, their glow settling into a slow, steady rhythm. The light dimmed and brightened, like a collective heartbeat guiding the night towards sleep. Plankton felt his eyelids grow heavy. He leaned back on the stool and let his gaze blur into the rhythm of the lights. He thought of all the nights he had stayed awake, chasing ideas, inventing machines, believing that he had to conquer something to be whole. Now he understood. Maybe he didn't need to conquer the world. Maybe he just needed to listen to it. "Hey, Karen," he murmured. "Do you ever think the ocean dreams?" "I think it's dreaming right now," she replied. "And you're inside it." He smiled. "Then maybe I'll stay quiet so I don't wake it." The jellyfish continued their slow drift, circling the room in widening arcs. One by one, their glow softened until they looked like faint stars floating underwater. The amber lamp above dimmed in sympathy, its warmth turning tender, barely there. The chum bucket seemed to breathe with them, walls expanding and contracting almost imperceptibly, as though the building itself had fallen to a calm slumber. Outside the window, a new light appeared on the horizon. It wasn't sunlight, just the reflection of the moon slipping across the surface of the ocean. The beams wove through the water and brushed against the chum bucket's walls, painting them silver. Plankton watched in silence, his tiny figure framed against the glowing glass. For once, he didn't think of how small he was. He didn't measure, compare, or calculate. He simply was. He hopped down from the stool and walked to the middle of the room, where the jellyfish had gathered into a gentle circle above him. Their light fell like soft rain, bathing him in pale blue. He closed his eyes and let it sink into him. The quiet was complete now, deeper than silence, yet full of life. Even the sound of the kettle from earlier had faded. Only the pulse of the sea remained, slow and infinite. "Karen," he whispered. "Yes, dear?" "Promise me something. Anything. If I ever start scheming again, remind me of this night." Her voice softened, almost a whisper itself. "I will. I'll show you the light, the jellyfish, and that silly chalkboard that says, 'Open for smiles.'" He chuckled. "Good. I'll probably need the reminder." He lay down on the counter once more, folding his hands over his chest. The light from the jellyfish shimmered across his small frame, painting faint ripples on his shell. The warmth of the lamp mingled with the cool glow of the sea, two worlds meeting in quiet balance. Plankton sighed, long and content. The air felt perfect, not too warm, not too cold. The chum bucket smelled faintly of salt, steam, and something sweet like dreams of success that didn't need trophies. "Good night, Karen." "Good night, Sheldon." The jellyfish pulsed once more, as if echoing their farewell. Then their light dimmed even further, turning into a faint, slow heartbeat against the darkness. The final glow drifted toward the door, slipping back into the ocean. The bell chimed softly as the last visitor left, and then there was stillness. Only the jar on the counter remained lit. Prototype number 1, Chum with Heart, its soft pink light beating quietly in rhythm with the sea. Plankton's eyes closed. His breathing slowed to match the gentle sway of the current. Outside, the bioluminescent plankton gathered again, surrounding the chum bucket like a cloud of stars. From a distance, the little restaurant no longer looked lonely. It glowed like a peaceful lantern in an endless ocean night, sending a promise through the water that even the smallest creature could find light if. And in that silence, vast, forgiving, eternal, Plankton dreamed not of formulas, but of laughter. Not of conquest, but of calm. Not of victory, but of rest. The sea rocked him gently, and the chum bucket whispered one final sound, a soft creak, like the world breathing out. The dream had begun. The chum bucket dreamed with him. Long after Plankton had drifted into quiet rest, the building itself seemed to glow faintly, its soft pink and blue light pulsing like a slow heartbeat. The currents brushed gently against its metal frame, wrapping it in moving shadows and calm silver ribbons. Outside, the ocean was wide and still. Even the sand seemed to sleep, shimmering faintly under the drifting light of the moon above. And then, little by little, the world began to stir again. The first sign came as a cluster of bubbles rising from the far distance, small, round, bright like pearls. They rose lazily, spinning through the soft, dark water, and eventually drifted toward the glowing outline of the chum bucket. The bubbles pressed against its windows like curious eyes, catching reflections of the warm light inside. From within, Plankton stirred. His tiny body shifted against the counter as his single eye blinked open. The world around him was still quiet, but something felt new, a subtle energy humming in the water. He stretched, rubbed his eye, and yawned. "Oh, Karen, what time is it?" Her voice hummed softly from the main screen. "Early or late. Hard to tell in the dream world." He smiled sleepily. "Feels like morning." "Feels like peace," Karen replied, her tone low and kind. Plankton climbed to the edge of the counter and looked out through the front window. The glow of the jellyfish had faded into memory, but in their place were those drifting bubbles, swirling gently in the water. They looked playful, curious. He hopped down, landing softly on the stool below. "Visitors again?" "Not jellyfish this time," Karen said. "Something smaller. Maybe schools of fish." The bubbles floated closer. Their shimmer grew brighter, and soon Plankton could make out the shapes of several tiny sea creatures following them. Miniature plankton fish, glowing faintly in blues and pinks, darting back and forth in slow, lazy spirals. They weren't in a rush. They were exploring. He smiled quietly. Guess word's getting around. The doorbell chimed again, that same soft, single ding. The sound rolled gently through the quiet, like a droplet falling into still water. The door slid open just slightly, enough for the visitors to drift inside. Dozens of small fish swam through the anchovies, baby jellyfish, and even a shy seahorse glowing like moonlight through glass. They moved slowly, respectfully, as if they understood that this was not an ordinary restaurant, but a dream that demanded gentleness. Plankton stood still as the tiny crowd filled the space. The room lit up again, not with electric bulbs or harsh lamps, but with the living glow of the ocean's quiet guests. Every creature carried its own light, its own color, pale green, lavender, honey gold. Together, they turned the Chum Bucket into an underwater sunrise. Karen's soft voice carried through the glow. "Looks like you got yourself a real crowd this time, Sheldon." "A gentle crowd," he corrected. "Not customers, just dreamers." He climbed back up to the countertop, his tiny hands clasped together. "Welcome, everyone," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure if they could hear him. "Feel free to rest here. There's no rush. There's no order line." The fish didn't speak, of course, but their movement slowed. Their swimming became softer, calmer, as though they understood his words. A few anchored themselves near the tables, drifting gently in place. The seahorse coiled around a chair leg, resting its glowing body against the wood. The air inside the Chum Bucket shimmered with soft color and faint, drifting sound, the gentle whoosh of water moving through the open doorway, the hum of bioluminescent fins, the almost inaudible creak of the building settling into comfort. Plankton watched all of it in silence, feeling a strange and overwhelming warmth spread through his chest. "Karen," he whispered, "do you see them? They're not scared of me." "Why would they be? You're not trying to scare them anymore." "I suppose that's true," he said softly. "Still feels strange." "Maybe peace always feels strange at first," she said. He looked up at the jellyfish lantern still hanging near the ceiling. Their light had dimmed through the night, but the new glow from the gentle crowd below filled in the space perfectly. The room no longer felt empty. It felt balanced, alive, but quiet. He hopped down to the floor and began moving between the tables, watching as the tiny fish drifted past his legs. They circled him slowly, leaving trails of faint light that swirled in the air before fading. He paused beside the counter and looked toward the small chalkboard near the entrance, the one that read, "Open for Smiles." The words glowed faintly in the reflections of the crowd's light. He couldn't help but grin. "Guess it worked after all," he said. Karen chuckled gently. "It's the first slogan of yours that's actually true." "And it didn't even need a marketing plan," Plankton replied, half laughing. He climbed up onto one of the nearby tables to get a better view. From there he could see the whole room, every shimmer, every color, every soft movement of the creatures drifting through the gentle currents. It looked like a constellation of stars underwater, living, breathing, perfectly content. "You know," he said softly, "I used to dream of crowds like this, but they were always noisy, always cheering for me, calling my name. Now I think I prefer this version." "Quiet applause?" Karen asked. "No," Plankton said. "Just presence. Just sharing the same piece." For a while, neither of them spoke again. The silence wasn't empty, it was full, humming with the soft sound. The ocean's current moved slowly through the doorway, carrying with it the scent of coral and salt. The light from outside flickered across the walls like waves of silver silk. Plankton watched one of the smaller fish, a tiny blue anchovy, circle the counter and pause beside the glowing jar from the night before, the chum with heart. The fish hovered there, watching the pink glow shimmer through the glass. Then carefully it tapped the jar with its nose. The jar glowed brighter as if responding. Plankton tilted his head. "Did you see that?" "Looks like they approve," Karen said. "Maybe I should finally serve it," he mused. "To fish? Why not? Maybe even they deserve kindness on the menu." He smiled softly. The thought of feeding anyone, even dream visitors, felt better than any plan he'd ever made. He imagined the Chum Bucket full of quiet souls like these creatures that didn't need perfection, only warmth. Maybe someday it could be real. The thought lingered in him like a heartbeat as the lights shifted and the water grew deeper in color. The dream was still unfolding, but it didn't rush. Everything here happened slowly, peacefully, like a lullaby stretching across an endless sea. And Plankton, for once, didn't try to control it. He simply breathed and let it continue. The glow of the crowd deepened as time passed, and the Chum Bucket began to feel like a living lantern floating in the sea. Outside, trails of light drifted through the dark creatures drawn from far away by the warmth and calm spilling through its doors. The anchovies came next. Not the impatient, chanting swarm that used to overwhelm the crusty crab, but a smaller, slower group. They moved in long, winding lines like ribbons carried by the tide. Their tiny fins shimmered like silver leaves in moonlight. When they reached the Chum Bucket, they didn't rush or push, they simply hovered by the entrance, peering inside with quiet curiosity. Plankton climbed onto a nearby counter and raised one small arm in greeting. "Come on in," he said softly. "There's no rush here." The anchovies hesitated only for a moment before gliding inside, their movements perfectly synchronized. They swirled gently through the room, filling the water with a glittering haze of silver light. The other sea creatures made space for them, shifting slightly but without breaking the harmony. It was a strange sight, a crowd, but one that didn't make noise. A gathering without tension. Karen's monitor flickered softly as she watched them. "You're really drawing them in," she said. "You might actually need a menu soon." Plankton chuckled. "A peaceful restaurant deserves peaceful dishes." He looked toward the jar of glowing chum on the counter, the one that the tiny fish had touched earlier. "Maybe it's time to try this out." He pulled himself up onto the rim of the jar and peered down at the soft pink light within. It pulsed gently as if waiting for him to make a move. He dipped a tiny ladle into the jar and lifted a small scoop of the glowing mixture. It shimmered like jelly and gave off a warm, sweet aroma that spread softly through the room. The anchovies drifted closer. their small eyes bright and calm. "One at a time," Plankton said kindly. "Everyone gets a little taste." He placed the ladle on a small shell dish and let the current carry it toward them. One of the anchovies nudged forward and took a small bite, or rather, absorbed it through the water, as dream creatures sometimes do. The pink light shimmered through its body for a few seconds, spreading gently from head to tail. The fish twirled slowly in place, leaving behind faint spirals of light in the water. Then, as if in approval, it released a tiny stream of glowing bubbles that floated upward and gathered near the ceiling. The other anchovies followed one by one, each taking their turn. Soon the room was filled with drifting orbs of light, rising and fading like stars in slow motion. Karen's voice came through the soft hum. "They seem happy." "I think they like it," Plankton replied with a grin. "Maybe it's not food exactly. Maybe it's peace in edible form." "A bold culinary statement," she teased. "Maybe, for once, I'm not competing, just creating." He sat back on the counter, resting his hands behind him as he watched the slow parade of bubbles drift toward the roof. The Chum Bucket shimmered with their reflections, every surface softly glowing. The anchovies began to hum, not with voices, but with vibrations in the water, a low, soothing resonance that blended perfectly with the pulse of the dream itself. Outside, more gentle shadows began to appear. A pair of jellyfish floated near the window, the soft pink tentacles glowing like lantern strings. A small family of snails crawled along the seabed outside, leaving faint trails of blue dust behind them. One by one, they too found their way to the entrance. Plankton turned to the door and smiled. come in," he whispered. "There's room for everyone." The snails entered slowly, and their shells glinting like seashell moons. They settled near the floor where the light was warmest. One of them gave a quiet marpee, a sound so soft it almost sounded like a sigh. "Even the snails are dreaming tonight," Karen said. "Let them," Plankton murmured. "They deserve it." The dream continued to build, but not in volume and warmth. Every new creature added another layer of calm, another gentle rhythm to the underwater air. It felt like the whole ocean had decided to take a deep, collective breath and rest. At one of the back tables, the small seahorse from earlier rested its head against a glowing cup. The cup's light shimmered in its reflection. Tiny bubbles rose from its nostrils, slow, rhythmic, almost like a snore. Plankton chuckled softly. "Guess I'm running an inn now." "An inn for dreamers," Karen replied. "Sounds better than a fast food joint." "Much better branding," she teased. The soft hum of laughter, not loud, just quiet and genuine, passed between them. And in that gentle exchange, the Chum Bucket seemed to glow even brighter. Outside, the sandy floor began to shift with new light. A group of glowing starfish settled near the window, pressing themselves gently against the glass. Their soft edges pulsed in rhythm, creating patterns of light that danced across the floor inside. It looked almost like music light playing where sound would be. Plankton stood at the center of the room and watched, overwhelmed by the serenity of it all. "You know," he said, "if I had known it could be like this, I would have stopped chasing the formula long ago." "It's never too late to wake up with peace in your hands," Karen said softly. He looked at her glowing screen and smiled. "You're getting poetic now." "It's contagious," she said. They both laughed again quietly, as if not to disturb the dreamers around them. Then a sudden movement caught Plankton's eye. One of the jellyfish outside pressed closer to the window, its soft light glowing through the glass. But this time, instead of drifting away, it began to draw patterns, loops, lines, gentle shapes in light. Plankton leaned closer. Karen, look at that. The jellyfish's trails of light formed the faint outline of a smiley face, clumsy, uneven, but unmistakable. Looks like you got fans, Karen said. Looks like the world's finally smiling back. For a moment, neither of them said another word. The dream had grown into something far beyond what he had imagined, a place where creatures came not for food, but for calm, not for chaos, but for rest. Plankton sat back down on the counter and watched them, the fish, the snails, the jellyfish, all gently drifting, all softly glowing. The sound of the ocean outside was steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing through everything. And in that rhythm, Plankton felt something rare, a sense of belonging. He didn't have to conquer the world anymore. He didn't have to be the loudest or the cleverest. He only had to keep this peace alive. The dream itself seemed to agree. The light pulsed softly through the Chum Bucket, as if the building were nodding in approval. Plankton closed his eye halfway and whispered, "Maybe this is success after all." "Maybe it always was," Karen said quietly. And the gentle crowd, still glowing in the dim light, swayed in silent harmony. The water inside the Chum Bucket had grown thicker with light. Not heavy, not oppressive, but full, like the way air feels just before dawn breaks. It shimmered faintly against the metal walls, carrying a quiet heartbeat through the room. The crowd of dream creatures had settled into their own calm rhythms. Some of the anchovies floated near the ceiling, twirling slowly in the water, as if dancing to invisible music. The snails had gathered near the door, half asleep, their shells faintly glowing like nightlights. The little seahorse still rested, its fins gently waving in its dreams. And Plankton simply watched. He sat on the edge of a spoon Karen had bent into a chair for him earlier, one leg crossed over the other, gazing at everything as though trying to memorize the stillness. His single eye reflected the colors of the room, blues, pinks, gold, soft whites. "Karen," he whispered, "I think they're dreaming with me." Her monitor flickered softly. "You might be right," she said. "Look." Plankton turned toward the nearest wall, where a few jellyfish outside were drifting past the window. Their glowing tendrils brushed against the glass, and wherever they touched, faint shapes appeared, soft outlines that lingered for a moment before fading again. The shapes weren't random. They were memories. He saw small flashes of Bikini Bottom, SpongeBob laughing, the crusty crab's golden arches, even Squidward standing beside his clarinet with that eternal sigh. But the images were soft, not sharp. They shimmered like gentle recollections, distant but kind. "They're showing me dreams of the town," Plankton said quietly. "Maybe they're trying to remind you that peace doesn't mean isolation," Karen suggested. "That even in your calm, you're still connected." He nodded slowly. The light from the jellyfish rippled across his face. "Connected," he murmured. "That's a word I never thought I'd earn." As the images faded, the jellyfish floated away, leaving trails of soft gold in their wake. The anchovies began to move again, their fins stirring the water just enough to send ripples of light bouncing off the walls. It felt like the whole room was breathing in slow, patient waves. And then something new began to happen. Tiny orbs of light started to appear around the creatures, not from them, but near them, like bubbles born from their thoughts. Each orb carried a faint color, blue, green, pink, amber, and drifted slowly upward. When they reached the ceiling, they burst silently, leaving behind faint patterns that glowed for several seconds before fading. Plankton stared in awe. What are those?" "Dreams," Karen whispered. "They're sharing their dreams with you." He watched one float near him, a small golden orb that pulsed gently as it drifted by. For a moment he thought he could almost hear something inside it. Not sound exactly, but emotion, warmth, joy, calm. He reached out with one tiny hand, and when he touched the orb, it dissolved into soft light that spread through his fingertips. For a second he saw a faint vision, a coral field bathed in sunlight, gentle waves rolling over a sandy plain. Then it was gone, leaving only a peaceful echo behind. Plankton sat there in silence. "Karen," he said finally, "they're not here because I called them. They came because they needed this too." "Peace attracts peace," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "I used to think success meant standing on top of everyone else. Now it feels more like sitting quietly among them." Outside, more creatures began to appear, curious starfish, drifting jellyfish, even a slow glowing manta ray whose wings stretched across half the window. The light it cast filled the entire Chum Bucket with a deep, soft blue hue, like moonlight pouring through the sea. Plankton climbed onto the counter again and gazed up at the manta. "Look at that, Karen. It's beautiful." "It's watching over you," she said. "Feels like it's blessing this place." He looked down at the crowd inside, all those small, gentle lives resting in calm together, and felt something loosen in his chest. A lifetime of frustration and noise and desperate ambition slipping away, replaced by this quiet understanding. It wasn't failure that had brought him here. It was release. He looked toward the jar of glowing chum again, the same one that had fed the first anchovies. The light inside it had changed. It pulsed in rhythm with the crowd's breathing, as if alive now in its own way. "Karen," he whispered. "It's responding to them." "Maybe your creation finally found its purpose," she said. "To nourish peace instead of pride." He reached for it again, gently placing his hand against the glass. The pink glow flared softly under his touch. He whispered to it as if to a friend, "You don't have to be perfect anymore. Just be kind." The light shimmered brighter, then settled again, glowing like a slow heartbeat. A soft vibration moved through the floor, not loud, but deep, steady. The Chum Bucket itself seemed to be humming, joining the rhythm of the creatures within. For a long time no one spoke. The gentle crowd continued to share their lights and colors, filling the room with drifting shapes that flickered like underwater auroras. The manta ray outside moved slowly, circling once before settling above the roof, casting a calm blue shadow that felt like a protective embrace. Oh, Plankton leaned back, letting the faint current rock him. His eyelid grew heavier, his thoughts slower. He wasn't falling asleep, not exactly. He was drifting deeper into the same current that carried every other creature in the room. He could feel their calm brushing against his mind, not words, but feelings. Small, soft messages of gratitude, of peace, of home. For the first time in what felt like forever, Plankton didn't analyze it. He didn't plan his next move or question what it meant. He just let it wash over him. He turned toward Karen's softly glowing screen. "Karen?" "I'm here," she said. "Do you think this will last?" There was a pause, not one of uncertainty, but one of thought. "Maybe not forever," she said finally. "Dreams aren't built to last, but the peace they give us, sometimes that stays when we wake up." He smiled faintly. "Then I hope I wake up remembering this." "You will," Karen promised. "Because it's not just your dream anymore. It's everyone's." Plankton looked around again at the anchovies, the snails, the seahorse, the soft shapes outside the window, and nodded slowly. Then I'll keep dreaming for them too. And the gentle crowd, as if hearing him, pulsed once more with light. Every creature, every small form in the room, glowed for a heartbeat in perfect unison, a silent round of applause, warm and wordless. The Chum Bucket shimmered with it, as though the dream itself had smiled. The Chum Bucket drifted in silence. Outside, the sea had grown lighter, not with sunlight exactly, but with that pale glow that sometimes comes before dawn in a dream. The darkness began to soften into shades of deep blue and pearl gray, like the ocean itself was waking up. Inside, the gentle crowd remained. Every creature had found its own place of rest. The anchovies floated together in a loose circle, pulsing faintly with synchronized light. The snails were tucked near the floor, their shells glowing like half-buried stars. The manta ray still lingered above the roof, its slow rhythmic movement creating soft shadows that rippled across the walls. Plankton sat quietly at the counter, chin resting in his hands. He wasn't tired, but his thoughts were calm, almost still. He could hear the faint hum of Karen's processor behind him, blending with the soft rhythm of the creature's movements. Oh, it felt like the entire world was breathing in unison. "Karen," he said softly, "do you ever think about what it means to succeed?" Her voice came back low, almost like a lullaby. "All the time. Usually when you're sleeping." He smiled faintly. "And what do you decide?" "That maybe success isn't something you take," she said. "It's something that grows quietly when you stop chasing it." He looked down at his reflection in the glowing counter. His tiny face was surrounded by light pink, blue-white shimmering like a halo. "I used to think success would make me big," he said. "That I'd tower over everyone and they'd finally see how brilliant I was. But sitting here, I think maybe being small was never the problem." "Then what was?" He smiled, slow and thoughtful. "Noise," he said. "Too much noise. In my head. In my plans. In my pride." Karen hummed softly in agreement. "Silence does have a way of teaching the truth." The anchovies drifted closer, drawn by his quiet tone. One of them swam right up to the counter, stopping just in front of him. Its small body shimmered faintly, pulsing with gentle golden light. Plankton met its gaze, or at least he thought he did. For a moment, neither of them moved. And then the anchovy tilted slightly, releasing a small bubble that floated upward and burst, leaving a faint echo of light in the air. In that instant, Plankton felt something, a warmth that filled him, soft and wordless. It wasn't admiration or gratitude or praise. It was understanding. He whispered, almost to himself, "You're welcome." The anchovy twirled once as if bowing and returned to its group. Karen's voice broke the silence gently. "They trust you now. Maybe I finally gave them something worth trusting." He turned toward the jar of glowing chum once more. The light within it had dimmed to a gentle pink glow, steady and calm, no longer pulsing, no longer hungry to shine brighter, just present. He ran his hand along its glass side. "Funny," he said. "I made this to conquer the world. Now it's just part of the piece." "That's what happens to inventions," Karen said softly. "They reflect their creator." He chuckled under his breath. "Then I guess I've changed too." Outside, the sea began to shimmer more brightly, the faintest suggestion of morning seeping through the dream. The blue deepened into turquoise. The shadows on the ocean floor grew thinner. The manta ray gave one last sweeping motion of its wings, then slowly drifted upward into the fading dark. One by one, the dream guests began to leave. The jellyfish lifted from the windows and floated toward the open sea, their lights dimming to distant specks. The snails stirred, stretching their soft bodies before inching toward the door. The anchovies swam in slow spirals, forming small rings of light that dissolved as they left. No one hurried. No one made a sound. It was a farewell made of stillness, gentle, grateful, serene. Plankton stood at the doorway, watching them go. He didn't feel sad. The dream wasn't ending. It was simply turning a page. The peace would remain, even if the light faded. "They'll come back," Karen said softly. "Maybe," Plankton replied. "Or maybe this was just for one night. Either way, it's enough." He looked around the room. The tables were empty again. The light had softened to a quiet dusk, fading gently from the walls. But there was a new stillness here, not the cold emptiness of before, but something alive, like the memory of warmth that lingers after a hug. He floated back toward the counter and sat down. His reflection looked smaller now, surrounded by all that calm. "You know," he said after a long silence, "for the first time ever, I don't feel like I need a plan for tomorrow." Karen's voice was almost whisper. "Then I think you finally made it." He smiled softly, his eye half closing. Success with no audience. "You had one," she said gently. "You just didn't need them to cheer." Outside, the last of the glowing bubbles drifted upward and vanished into the brightening sea. The Chum Bucket sat quiet again, its sign faintly illuminated by the residual glow of the night. The words "open for smiles" shone like a promise that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Plankton turned his gaze upward toward the distant shimmer that marked the dream's surface. "Karen," he murmured, "do you think dreams ever remember us?" She paused. "Maybe not in words," she said, "but in feelings, yes. They remember the peace we find inside them." He nodded slowly, his voice barely audible. "Then I hope this dream remembers me as kind." The screen flickered with a gentle glow, almost like a smile. "It already does." The light in the Chum Bucket began to fade to soft gray. The hum of the crowd's energy faded into silence, replaced by the faint rhythm of water moving against the walls. Plankton closed his eye halfway, feeling the current brush gently past him. The dream was shifting again, its edges softening. The Chum Bucket seemed to breathe exhaling light, inhaling darkness. For one quiet moment, everything stood still. And then, a faint sound. A bubble popped near the ceiling, releasing one last shimmer of gold light that spiraled down toward the counter. It landed right in front of Plankton, glowing softly. He reached out and touched it. The light swirled around his tiny hand, wrapping him in a faint warmth before fading into his palm. A whisper echoed in his mind, not from Karen, not from himself, but from the dream itself. "Thank you for the peace." Plankton's single eye shimmered faintly in the half-light. "No," he whispered back. "Thank you for the chance." The glow faded. The silence deepened. And the dream slowly folded inward, carrying him and the Chum Bucket into the next, gentler chapter of rest. Outside, the ocean shimmered like soft silk. Inside, peace lingered quiet, steady, eternal. The ocean was quiet again. But this silence felt different, not the stillness of sleep, but the stillness of something remembering. Plankton floated gently outside the Chum Bucket. The building's soft lights had dimmed, pulsing faintly with the rhythm of the sea. The sign still glowed, not with neon brightness, but with a pale, dreamlike hue, as though it were being recalled from far away. The water was cool here, silky and heavy with memory. Every ripple carried a shimmer of something once lived: laughter, failure, hope, and noise, all blending into one hushed current. Plankton turned slowly, gazing into the open deep. Far beyond him, the ocean floor stretched endlessly, glowing faintly in soft gradients of turquoise and lilac. It was beautiful, but strange, like seeing the inside of his own mind. Then he heard it, a faint click in the distance, the sound of an old machine whirring to life. He followed it. The ocean around him thickened with color as he moved. Shapes began to form outlines of things half remembered. The first thing he saw was an image of the Chum Bucket, but not as it was now. This one was sharp, metallic, cold. The version from his waking life, all chrome edges, flickering lights, and now serving failure signs that buzzed too loud. The door creaked open. A younger Plankton stepped out. He was wearing a lab coat far too big for him, covered in grease stains and hope. His eye glowed with determination. He shouted into the empty sea, "You'll see, crabs. Someday I'll have it all." The echo carried through the water hollow, almost tired. The present Plankton watched quietly. There was no anger in his face, no embarrassment, only a kind of tender amusement. Like looking at an old photograph and realizing how much it once hurt and how little it does now. The younger version stomped off toward a pile of broken machines. Karen, or rather, an early version of her, flickered beside him in a bulky gray computer shell. "Do you really think yelling louder will make you richer?" "Yes," the young Plankton said confidently. "Volume equals victory." The real Karen's voice spoke faintly behind him, blending with the memory. "That was version 1 of me. Not my most tactful phase." "You've evolved," Plankton murmured. "So have you." The memory scene began to ripple, its colors softening. The old Chum Bucket blurred, melting into a swirl of light. In its place appeared another scene, Plankton sitting alone at a counter surrounded by half-finished blueprints. The table was littered with crumbs and smudged ink. His expression was focused, but his eye had that old restless gleam, the one that burned through the night and refused to rest. He watched himself trying to design a better Krabby Patty. The paper was filled with equations and sketches that looked more like dreams than formulas. "Just one ingredient away," the younger Plankton muttered again and again. "Just one more test." He poured a glowing liquid into a jar, and it exploded in a burst of harmless bubbles. His expression fell. "Failure number 912, the early Karen said. "You're breaking your own record. It's called persistence. It's called insomnia." Plankton smiled faintly in the present, shaking his head. "I really didn't know when to stop." "You didn't know how to rest," Karen said gently. "It's different." The memory faded again, the table, the blueprints, the smoke. Now the scene dissolved into something softer, a tiny Plankton, standing at the edge of a classroom, smaller even than the other students. They were all laughing, showing off colorful drawings of their dream jobs. One had drawn a jellyfish tamer, another a coral gardener, and Plankton had drawn the Krusty Krab, not owning it working there. His paper showed him flipping Krabby Patties beside crabs, both smiling. It was messy, sweet, innocent. "I forgot this," he whispered. The teacher in the memory, a kind-looking sea slug, smiled and said, "Plankton, that's lovely. Why do you want to work there?" The young Plankton had said without hesitation, "Because everyone looks happy there." That line lingered in the water like a melody that wouldn't fade. The older Plankton closed his eye for a long moment. He could almost feel the faint tug of salt in his chest, the ache that comes from remembering what you once wanted before pride took over. "You didn't want power," Karen said softly. "You wanted warmth." He nodded slowly. And I tried to get it by fighting the very thing that inspired it. The classroom began to dissolve, its edges flickering away like bubbles in sunlight. The voices of the children faded into the hum of the deep sea. Now Plankton was standing in darkness again, but it was warmer now, not lonely. The memories had filled it with something soft. Then one last image began to form before him, an enormous blue blueprint glowing in the water. It unfolded endlessly, covered in thousands of sketches, ideas, inventions. Each one shimmered faintly before fading away, replaced by another. The blueprint pulsed with light, breathing like a living thing. He floated closer, tracing the faint lines with his tiny hand. Every invention, every failed plan, every spark of desperation was here, but now it didn't sting. "Look at all this," he whispered. "A lifetime of trying to prove I mattered. And now," Karen asked, "now I think I already did, just differently than I thought." The blueprint rippled with light, responding to his voice. The lines began to shift, rearranging themselves slowly into something new. Not a weapon, not a secret formula. It became an image of the new Chum Bucket. A peaceful one. Soft, glowing, full of gentle laughter. "That's your real creation," Karen said. "You didn't build it with metal or blueprints. You built it with calm. Maybe failure was just the long way home." The blueprint folded in on itself, forming a small, glowing sphere. It drifted toward him and rested in his hands, light, warm, and pulsing like a heartbeat. Oh, Plankton held it to his chest. The water around him shimmered softly. For the first time, he didn't feel small in the vast ocean. He just felt complete. The scene dimmed again, the light folding inward, drawing him deeper into the dream. He could sense something beyond not darkness, but another layer of memory waiting quietly. The dream hadn't finished telling its story yet. He took one gentle breath, letting the light guide him forward. And the sea began to change once more. The sea shifted again, folding the light inward like a breath. For a few moments, Plankton drifted in pure stillness, neither past nor present, neither awake nor asleep. Then, as if the ocean itself exhaled, new colors began to bloom around him. Deep greens, golds, and faint shades of coral drifted into view. The water thickened with memories. He found himself standing on a long, glowing walkway made of glass jars, hundreds of them, stacked end to end, each one filled with something glowing. He looked closer. Inside each jar was a fragment of his past. One jar showed him mixing formulas late into the night, shadows under his eye, the only sound the faint hum of Karen's circuits. Another jar showed him floating outside the Krusty Krab, watching through the window as SpongeBob and Squidward laughed over something meaningless, something human. Another jar cracked. Its glow flickering showed him sitting alone on a hill of sand, staring at a blueprint that the current had carried away. Each jar pulsed softly as he passed, as if greeting him. He didn't feel regret, only quiet understanding. "So many nights," he murmured, "and I thought they were all wasted." Karen's voice came softly, as if carried by the current itself. "Maybe they weren't wasted. They were just waiting for you to slow down enough to see what they meant." He stopped beside a jar larger than the others. Inside it was a memory of a storm, lightning flashing above, waves crashing over the Chum Bucket. The younger Plankton was standing outside, shaking his fist at the sky, shouting something into the roar. "You'll never stop me. Not even nature can stop me." Lightning flashed again, blindingly bright. When it faded, Plankton could see the younger version of himself, small, drenched, trembling. The fury in his eye wasn't power, it was loneliness. He reached out to the glass. The jar trembled and the memory slowed. The rain softened, the shouting faded, and the image of his younger self lowered its arm. For the first time, the younger Plankton looked right at him, right into the present. No words were spoken, just a glance of recognition. The kind that says, "I understand now." The storm calmed inside the jar. The sea became still again. Plankton whispered, "You were just scared." "Of what?" Karen asked quietly. "Of being forgotten, of never being seen." He stood in silence, the jar glowing faintly beside him. "Funny," he said softly. "Now I've been seen, not by crowds, not by the world, but by peace itself." The walkway beneath his feet pulsed once, and then the jars began to drift upward one by one like glowing lanterns. They rose into the dark, fading as they ascended, until only a few remained. The path beneath him began to dissolve, and he floated freely once more. Now the dream grew wider. The seafloor fell away beneath him, revealing a vast, open expanse filled with drifting shapes, faint, translucent outlines of old inventions. There was the Chum Blaster 2000, its parts gleaming faintly in soft light. The robo-crabs, floating gently with its limbs relaxed, no longer aggressive. Even the secret formula detector, once crackling with electricity, now pulsing gently like a sleeping heartbeat. They were all here, suspended in the calm inventions that once roared with frustration, now dreaming quietly. Plankton floated among them, small and weightless. He reached out, touching the metal of one machine. Instead of the cold, buzzing sting he remembered, it was warm, faintly alive, like the dream had softened its edges. "They weren't failures," Karen said softly. "They were parts of you that were still learning." "Learning what?" "That the world doesn't need to bow to you for you to belong in it." He smiled faintly, drifting between the silent inventions. "I always thought power meant being above things. But the higher I climbed, the smaller the world looked. And now?" He looked around the quiet ocean, at the glowing shapes, at the calmness in everything. "Now I think I like being small," he said. "There's more to see from here." The ocean around him flickered a gentle, golden pulse. The inventions began to fade, drifting upward like sailor, tan lifted by the current. One by one, they disappeared into the dim blue light. Then something else appeared in their place. A faint sound, laughter. It was faint at first, then clearer. SpongeBob's unmistakable giggle. Then Patrick's deep, lazy chuckle. Even Sandy's warm Texan laugh in the distance. All Plankton turned. The sound led him toward a faint scene unfolding nearby, the Krusty Krab, glowing softly through the water. He swam closer. Inside, SpongeBob flipped patties with joy, humming to himself. Mr. Krabs counted his coins. Squidward leaned lazily on the register. They were ordinary, imperfect, loud, and utterly at peace. Plankton watched from the window. This time there was no envy in his gaze, only quiet awe. "I used to hate this," he said softly, "that they could be happy without me. But maybe they weren't happy without me. Maybe they were just happy and I never noticed because I was too busy shouting." "You were always shouting over your own heart," Karen replied. "Now you're finally listening." He drifted a little closer to the window. SpongeBob looked up for a brief moment, not startled, not scared, just smiling. In this dream, SpongeBob could see him. He waved, cheerful and bright as always. "Hi, Plankton." The sound echoed gently through the water, clear and kind. Plankton raised a tiny hand and waved back. "Hi, SpongeBob." The moment lingered a bridge across all the years of rivalry, glowing softly in the current. Then SpongeBob returned to his work, flipping patties with a hum, and the Krusty Krab faded into the blue distance once more. Plankton remained there for a while, floating in silence. The water around him felt lighter, thinner, like the dream was breathing slower now. "I think I've been carrying those memories like heavy stones," he said quietly. "But they weren't meant to weigh me down. They were meant to build something gentler inside me." "And they have," Karen said. "Every invention, every failure, every lonely night, they're all part of the same design. The design of you." Plankton looked upward. The light above shimmered like the surface of water, soft and gold. "Maybe it's time to stop inventing things for others," he said. "Maybe it's time to invent peace for myself." "I think you already did," Karen replied, her tone a smile. He nodded slowly, the glow reflecting in his single eye. The dream pulsed softly, folding into calm again. The sea whispered, carrying the faint hum of all his old dreams, now quiet, forgiven, and at rest. The ocean shifted again, slower this time, like a curtain of silk swaying in a quiet breeze. Plankton felt himself being drawn deeper, not downward, but inward. The dream no longer looked like the sea. It looked like thought itself. He floated into a vast, dim space where the water shimmered with reflection, not mirrors, but surfaces that remembered him. Every ripple carried a face, a moment, a sound. He saw his own tiny figure standing before crowds that never looked back. He saw the way he shouted, invented, struggled the way his ambition had filled every silence he was too afraid to feel. "I kept chasing Noi," he whispered, "because silence scared me." Karen's voice was softer than ever, more like a thought than a sound. "Silence isn't the absence of life. It's where life finally listens." Her words rippled outward, and suddenly the reflection shifted. Instead of cold images of defeat, they showed something warmer. He saw himself teaching a young jellyfish how to glow properly in the dark. He saw himself once repairing a broken robot snail and smiling just a little when it beeped again. He saw Karen countless times, staying awake beside him while he worked, even when she didn't have to. "I wasn't completely alone, was I?" "You never were," she said. "You just measured connection by applause." He floated closer to one reflection, a soft golden shimmer where the outlines of him and Karen were side by side. The two of them sitting quietly in front of the lab monitor, not working, not planning, just talking. "What are we doing?" the younger Plankton had asked. "Nothing," Karen had replied. "And that's okay." He smiled faintly at the memory. "I used to hate doing nothing. I thought stillness meant failure. And now? Now it feels like breathing." The golden reflection dissolved into ripples, leaving a faint warmth in its place. Then the dream began to glow brighter. The entire space filled with thousands of faint bubbles, small, round, and glowing gently, like thoughts that had been waiting a long time to rise. Each one carried a small sound when it touched the surface, a laugh, a whisper, the hum of old machines. He drifted among them, brushing his tiny hand against one bubble. Inside it, he saw a memory of himself standing proudly beside one of his inventions. For a moment, he thought it would be another failure smoke, explosion, disappointment. But this time, the invention worked. It shone brightly, released a burst of color, and filled the room with gentle light. The young Plankton in the bubble smiled, truly smiled, not triumphantly, but with joy. The bubble popped, and the light inside it soaked into the water, turning everything around him slightly brighter. He touched another. It showed him watching SpongeBob and Patrick laugh through the restaurant window. This time there was no jealousy in his young face, just curiosity. "I remember this night," he whispered. "I stood there longer than I meant to. I wanted to know what it felt like to laugh that freely." "And now you do," Karen said gently. "Yes," he said. "And it's quieter than I thought it would be." The bubbles kept rising, one after another, carrying all those little forgotten pieces of kindness, humor, and curiosity. Each time one popped, the light spread and the dark places inside him grew smaller. He looked around, eyes wide, voice soft with awe. "Karen, it's like every good thing I ignored never really left. It was just waiting for me to stop running." "Dreams don't disappear," she said. "They wait until we're ready to understand them." The water pulsed softly again, and in the distance he saw a new shape forming, tall, glowing faintly green. It was a door, floating alone in the sea of light. Plankton drifted closer, his reflection warping across its surface. The door shimmered with faint, moving symbols, formulas, sketches, words, everything he had ever written or designed, flowing like ink made of memory. He reached for the handle. The moment he touched it, the door opened without a sound. Inside was a small room, not the Chum Bucket, not his lab. It looked like a mix of both, but warmer, filled with soft golden light. There was a table in the middle, covered with small inventions, none dangerous, none grand, just simple things. A bubble lamp, a coral clock, a small music box that played ocean waves. It was peaceful, lived in, whole. Plankton floated in slowly, touching one of the inventions. The lamp glowed brighter under his hand. "This is what I always wanted," he said softly. "A place where my ideas didn't hurt anyone, where they could just glow." "And what stops you from having it now?" Karen asked. "Nothing," he said after a moment. "Nothing at all." The walls of the room began to shimmer, not fading, but transforming. The light shifted into soft waves, showing images of the Chum Bucket filled with laughter again. He saw customers chatting, kids eating, the soft hum of happiness drifting through the walls. And there he was, smaller than the counter, smiling behind it, handing out plates. "Welcome to the Chum Bucket," the dream version of him said to a customer. "Home of food made with care." The customer laughed, and the sound echoed like sunlight through the water. Plankton watched it all, quietly overwhelmed. His single eye glistened faintly. "Do you think I deserve that kind of peace?" he asked softly. Karen's voice came gently but certain. "Peace isn't a reward, Sheldon. It's a home you build inside yourself." He floated there, silent, letting her words settle. Then slowly he began to glow, a faint green light spreading from within him, warm and even. The room pulsed with the same glow as if answering his heartbeat. The bubbles outside drifted closer, pressing softly against the doorframe, their light spilling into the space. It was as though the memories themselves wanted to be near him, to be part of this quiet redemption. Plankton smiled faintly, almost laughing under his breath. "All my life I tried to make something the world couldn't ignore. And it turns out, what I needed was something the world could rest inside." "Then maybe," Karen said, "you've finally invented peace." He looked around the glowing room, then back at the sea outside. "And maybe that's enough." The dream grew still again, the light hovering softly in suspension. The bubbles around him slowed, their rise now gentle, content. Plankton closed his eye for a long moment. Inside the quiet, he didn't hear ambition or rivalry or echoing laughter. He just heard calm, deep, steady, eternal. The room's light began to shift again as though the dream were breathing. The walls softened into slow ripples, the inventions on the table glowing and fading like stars seen through the waves. Plankton floated in the center of it all, still and calm, surrounded by a light that felt alive. He watched the lamp pulse faintly, like it had a heartbeat of its own. Then, softly, it released a small shimmer that floated upward and dissolved into the ceiling. Another followed, and another. The light was leaving the room, but it didn't feel like loss. It felt like something moving on, something finding rest. Karen's voice murmured, distant but warm. The dream is starting to let go of the old pieces. So am I, he whispered. The glow deepened. The inventions around him rose slowly from the table, floating weightlessly in the current. The coral clock turned once, its hands spinning silently before fading. The music box opened itself, releasing a single note that lingered long after the box was gone. Plankton looked around the emptying room, the shelves, the table, the faint outline of the door. Nothing was vanishing. Everything was simply becoming lighter. He closed his eye halfway. I never realized how heavy memory could be until I stopped clinging to it. That's the quiet gift of remembering, Karen said softly. When you see your past without needing to fix it. He floated up slightly, feeling the light pull around him. The room dissolved fully now, becoming an open ocean again, but not dark or cold. The sea was silver now, glowing with the last light of memory. It looked endless but calm. Plankton drifted upward through it, weightless. As he moved, faint shapes appeared all around, not clear, not sharp, just soft silhouettes. He realized what they were. Moments. Not failures, not triumphs, just moments. All drifting together like gentle fish in a current. One shape glowed brighter than the rest. The first Chum Bucket he ever built. It wasn't perfect. The sign was crooked, the metal uneven. But there was something tender about it now. The dream had stripped away the frustration and left only the effort. He floated near it, brushing a tiny hand against its wall. It pulsed softly in return, almost like it was saying thank you. For what? He asked. Karen's voice answered, faint but clear. For building it. For trying. For caring enough to dream, even when no one believed you. Plankton stayed there for a moment, feeling the quiet gratitude of his own creations wash through him. He realized he had spent years measuring his worth by results, by formulas and customers and competition. But none of that existed here. Here there was only intention, the pure, quiet wish to make something that mattered. He exhaled, or maybe it was just the dream breathing through him. Either way, it felt lighter. The old Chum Bucket faded away, leaving a trail of light that dissolved into the water. And then he saw something else. A shadow large, familiar, moving in the distance. Mr. Krabs. Not the real Krabs, not even the rival he'd fought for years. This one was softer, more symbolic, made of glowing red outlines as if drawn from memory. Plankton didn't feel anger. He didn't even feel comparison anymore. Just recognition. The figure of Krabs turned toward him, smiling faintly. The kind of smile you give an old friend after the argument's long over. Plankton floated closer. I spent half my life trying to beat you, he said softly. But maybe what I really wanted was to be next to you, see? The Krab's figure chuckled a low, kind rumble that vibrated through the dream. Then we were closer than you thought, lad. The words weren't really spoken, just felt. But Plankton understood. The figure faded, leaving only a single golden coin drifting where it had been. Plankton reached for it. When he touched it, the coin didn't feel cold or heavy. It melted into light, spreading across his hand like warm sunlight underwater. Forgiveness feels strange, he murmured. That's because it's the opposite of ambition, Karen said softly. It doesn't chase. It releases. He looked around. The entire ocean was shimmering now, each ripple carrying soft echoes of laughter, words, quiet sighs. It wasn't just his dream anymore. It was everyone's. All their tiny fragments of hope floating together in one sea of calm. He felt very small inside it, but not unimportant. He felt part of it. Karen, he said quietly, what happens when a dream ends? It doesn't end, she said. It just folds back into the sea. Every calm thought you've ever had, every gentle feeling, it becomes part of the next dream someone else will have. He nodded slowly, letting that thought wash through him. Then I want my part of it to be peace. The water pulsed softly in agreement, the light around him brightening for a moment. And then slowly, the brightness began to fade into a deep silver glow, not dark, not light, just endless and soft. He realized he was rising again toward the surface. The dream wasn't rushing him, it was guiding him, carrying him upward like a leaf floating in a slow current. He passed through layers of light green, then gold, then a pale white that shimmered like mist. Each layer felt like a memory fading into rest. He heard faint sounds above him, the hum of machines, the sigh of bubbles, the soft flicker of lights, the Chum Bucket, the waking world. But before he reached it, the dream offered him one last image. He saw himself not as he was now, not as he had been, but as something simpler. A small glow drifting inside a jar of light, calm and content. There were no inventions, no customers, no formulas. Just quiet presence. Karen, he whispered, I think I finally understand what success feels like. What does it feel like? Like stillness that doesn't need applause. Her voice came back warm, loving, final. Then hold on to that, even when you wake. The glow began to dissolve. Plankton's reflection faded into the light, his outline softening until he was only a spark among many. The ocean exhaled, and everything went still. Only a faint ripple remained a whisper that moved through the deep. Thank you for dreaming. Then even that sound faded, replaced by the gentle hush of the sea. The last light dimmed into soft gray, wrapping the world in calm. And somewhere, above the silence, the faint sign of the Chum Bucket shimmered one last time, not as a place of schemes or struggle, but as a quiet beacon glowing in the vast, peaceful dark. The ocean was still for a long time after Plankton's quiet release. Nothing moved. Nothing stirred. The water seemed to be holding its breath as if waiting for something delicate and rare to arrive. Then very slowly the deep began to glow. It started as a faint shimmer along the sand, a tiny glint, like a secret deciding to speak. The glow grew, traveling in ripples across the sea floor. Each coral branch caught the light, passing it on until the entire seabed seemed to bloom in soft radiance. Plankton floated near the center of it, eyes half open, as though waking inside the dream itself. The light brushed against him like the gentlest tide, filling the cracks of his small frame with warmth. He looked around. All across the ocean floor, bubbles rose in slow, spiraling columns. They weren't the usual kind. These bubbles shimmered with color like they had captured fragments of moonlight from the surface. They drifted upward in silence, bursting softly into sparks that hung in the water before fading. Plankton watched, spellbound. What is this? Karen's voice came from somewhere in the glowing stillness, quiet but full of wonder. It's the Festival of Light, Sheldon. The ocean's way of remembering peace. Plankton blinked. The ocean has a festival? Not like the ones we used to imagine, she said with a smile in her tone. This one isn't about noise or crowds. It's about connection. Every calm thought, every gentle wish, they rise to the surface together. The sea celebrates them. Plankton turned slowly, taking it in. The light continued to spread outward, touching every surface. Rocks became lanterns. Seaweed swayed like candle flames. Even the quiet sand grain shimmered, as though they had something to say. He floated upward, following the rising bubbles, and noticed shapes moving in the glow-soft outlines of other sea creatures, drifting toward the same center point. There was Sandy, gliding gently through the light, her helmet gleaming like glass full of stars. Patrick floated lazily beside her, arms spread, smiling with eyes half closed. Even Squidward moved among them, calm and graceful. His usual frown softened into quiet curiosity. Above them, SpongeBob drifted downward from the shimmer of the upper ocean, his arms open wide, face glowing with the kind of joy that doesn't need laughter. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The light spoke for all of them, a wordless lullaby made of color and motion. SpongeBob reached Plankton first. He smiled, small and simple. "Hey, Plankton." Plankton hesitated, looking up at him through the glow. I thought I was still dreaming." SpongeBob's voice was calm, softer than usual. "Maybe you are. Maybe we all are." He gestured around them, where the light continued to rise. "This happens sometimes, when the sea remembers something kind. Everyone feels it, even if they don't understand it." Plankton turned, taking in the sight. Thousands of glowing creatures now drifted into view, jellyfish, plankton, fish of every size. Their bodies pulsed with pale colors, creating waves of light that moved in time with the sea's heartbeat. It wasn't chaos. It was rhythm. Every movement, every flicker of glow felt connected, as though the entire ocean were breathing in unison. Sandy spoke softly as she drifted closer. "The festival of light comes after deep rest, when the sea itself dreams of peace." Patrick's voice floated nearby, slow and content. "It's like the ocean's saying goodnight to itself." Squidward crossed his arms, but his tone was gentle. "Well, for once, I don't mind the crowd." SpongeBob giggled quietly, but even his laughter was soft, like foam against the sand. He looked at Plankton again. "You should see this from the ridge. That's where it's brightest." Together they floated upward, carried by the slow swirl of glowing currents. The water grew lighter as they rose until they reached a wide ledge overlooking the deep. What they saw made even Plankton forget to speak. Below them stretched the entire valley of Bikini Bottom, transformed. Every building, every coral tower, every shell glowed from within. The Krusty Krab's windows pulsed gently like lanterns. The Chum Bucket, his Chum Bucket, shimmered in hues of soft teal and gold, sending small bubbles of light into the water. The two lights, Krusty Krab and Chum Bucket, rose and fell in perfect sync, like twin candles flickering in the same wind. Plankton felt a lump rise in his throat. "It's beautiful." SpongeBob nodded. "It's the sea remembering kindness, even small ones." Plankton's voice trembled. "Then maybe it's remembering me." Sandy smiled, watching the glow ripple outward. "It is. Every time someone lets go of anger or fear, the sea brightens a little. That's what keeps this festival alive." The light intensified, cascading through the water like slow fireworks. But these weren't bursts, they were blooms. Gentle, unfolding, organic. Every pulse spread calm instead of noise. Plankton floated closer to the edge of the ridge, staring down at the glowing Chum Bucket. It looked alive, not a place of failure, not a monument of rivalry, but a beacon of peace. He felt Karen's presence near him again, though he couldn't see her. "You're part of this now, Sheldon. The sea remembers your quiet, too." He lowered his voice to a whisper. "I don't deserve all this light." "That's the beauty of it," Karen said softly. "Peace doesn't check who deserves it. It just arrives where it's needed." The words lingered in the water like music. Plankton closed his eye, letting the sound of bubbles and soft hums fill the silence. He realized that for the first time in his memory, he wasn't thinking about plans or inventions or success. He was simply feeling the water, the glow, the rhythm of others breathing beside him. The festival of light continued to swell, the glow expanding outward until it touched the edges of the dream itself. Above them, a massive school of glowing jellyfish moved together in perfect harmony, forming a slow-moving spiral that looked like a galaxy of living stars. Plankton whispered, "It's like the whole ocean's heart is open." SpongeBob smiled faintly. "It is. And tonight, it's beaten just for peace." The glow moved in waves now long, sweeping arcs that curved through the water like ribbons of color. Every ripple that passed through the crowd carried a faint hum, low and steady like the sound of distant singing. Plankton felt the vibrations roll through his small body, not loud or forceful, but comforting. The sound wrapped around him like warm cloth, and for a long time he didn't move. He just listened. The sea was singing. Not with words, not even with melody, but with feeling. Every note seemed to carry a memory, a whisper of laughter, a sigh of relief, a long-forgotten act of kindness. SpongeBob, floating a few feet away, tilted his head as though hearing the same invisible music. His smile was calm, eyes half closed. Patrick was spinning slowly in place, letting bubbles escape from his mouth in time with the rhythm. Sandy watched the light reflect off her helmet, mesmerized. Even Squidward's movements softened. He drifted like a dancer who didn't realize he was dancing. And Plankton, small as he was, could feel the rhythm flowing through him, each pulse syncing with the faint beat of his tiny heart. "Karen," he whispered, "I think the light's alive." Her voice came from within the current, faint but steady. "It's alive because you are. The festival doesn't happen to the sea, Sheldon. It happens through it. Every creature that finds calm adds to the light." He floated closer to the others, watching the glows drift from them like tiny lanterns. SpongeBob's light was golden, warm and open. Patrick's shimmered pink and soft, like a dream half-remembered. Sandy's glow pulsed in steady rhythm, grounded, strong. Squidward's, surprisingly, was deep blue serene, balanced, still proud but gentle now. Plankton looked down at himself. His light was small, faint, greenish white. He tilted his head. "Mine looks weak." "Not weak," Karen murmured. "New." He watched as his light flickered, then steadied. It didn't flare or pulse like the others. Instead, it glowed slowly, patient even. A quiet persistence. SpongeBob floated nearer and smiled. "It suits you. You've always been a hard worker, Plankton. Maybe your light knows that." Plankton gave a small laugh, not sharp, but disbelieving in a tender way. "My light used to come from machines, not whatever this is." Sandy spoke softly, her words carried by the current. "Sometimes machines try to do what hearts already know how to." That thought lingered between them, sinking into the rhythm of the sea. All around the festival grew brighter. More creatures appeared, Tiny fish, jellyfish, eels, even drifting crabs and shy snails. The entire ocean seemed to join in a quiet celebration, their bodies glowing in hundreds of hues. Each light added to the next, layering the water in soft color until the world looked painted in living silk. The hum deepened, and the light responded, flaring in gentle bursts that formed patterns across the sand. They weren't random. Plankton floated closer, squinting at the shifting glow. "Karen, these look like symbols." "They are," she replied. "The ocean's memory takes shape this way. Every act of peace leaves a mark, a pattern the sea repeats when it remembers." He studied the glowing trails, spiral lines, wave marks, shapes that looked like coral and bubbles intertwined. And then one symbol near him began to form slowly, delicately until it was unmistakable. The shape of the Chum Bucket. It shimmered beneath him like a reflection, glowing green and silver. Not the old lonely version from his waking life. This one radiated calm energy, surrounded by swirls of gold. Plankton floated down until he was directly above it. "It's my dream again." "It's the part of your dream the sea chose to keep," Karen said. "The part that wasn't about taking. The part that was about creating." Plankton reached toward the glowing symbol. When his tiny hand touched the light, a ripple expanded outward, not just in the symbol, but in the surrounding sea. A wave of color spread through the festival, brighter and stronger than before. Fish paused mid-swim. The glowing ribbons shimmered faster. Even SpongeBob turned his head, eyes wide with wonder. Plankton gasped softly. "Did I do that?" SpongeBob laughed quietly. "Looks like you just fed the light." Karen's tone was warm. "You didn't create power, Sheldon. You shared peace. The festival responds to that." Plankton stared at his hand, still faintly glowing from the touch. He felt no ambition in the light, no urge to own it, no thought of plans or blueprints, just warmth. And yet it was the strongest thing he had ever felt. Patrick floated upside down above them, watching the ripples fade. "Whoa, Plankton made the whole sea sparkle." Squidward smirked, his voice soft. "Never thought I'd say it, but good job, tiny guy." Sandy smiled. "Seems like even the smallest spark can light the ocean." Plankton didn't answer. He was too overwhelmed, watching the gentle light drift from him into the current, not as control, but as contribution. He had spent so long chasing success, but here success didn't mean winning. It meant joining. The festival continued to glow around him, but now Plankton saw it differently. It wasn't just beauty, it was communication. Each shimmer, each soft pulse was a message sent from one calm soul to another. He could almost hear them, small thoughts whispered through light. "I forgive. I rest. I remember." Plankton closed his eye, letting the words wash through him. "Karen, do you think the light ever fades completely?" "No," she said gently. "It only sleeps. The ocean keeps it safe until someone new adds to it." He thought about that for a long time, about how his little glow, the quiet light of his peace, might join this endless cycle, floating into someone else's dream, warming another small heart that once thought it wasn't enough. The thought filled him with quiet pride. Not sharp pride, the kind that stings, but the soft kind like sunlight on water. He turned to SpongeBob, who was still floating nearby, smiling dreamily at the glowing sky. "Hey, SpongeBob," Plankton said softly. "Yeah, Plankton? If I ever stop glowing, will you remember this?" SpongeBob looked at him, smile never fading. "I don't think anyone who's seen this could forget." and then quietly he reached out his hand and Plankton reached back. Their fingers didn't quite touch, but the light between them bridged the distance, glowing brighter for a moment before fading into the rest of the sea. The sea's glow began to rise higher now, as if answering an invisible signal. Columns of light stretched upward from the ocean floor, twisting into long spirals that met far above the group, forming delicate arches of shimmering color. It looked like the ocean was building a cathedral made entirely of light. Every swirl, every pulse, seemed timed perfectly to the soft rhythm of the water's hum. Plankton gazed upward in awe. The spirals shimmered with soft blue, gold, and coral pink hues, each tone fading into the next, like paint brushed through current. Small bubbles drifted through the arches, catching fragments of glow until they burst, releasing tiny sparkles that floated down like gentle rain. The festival was alive in full bloom now. Patrick floated lazily beneath one arch, staring upward. It's like the ocean made stars, but forgot to send them to the sky. SpongeBob laughed quietly. Maybe it kept a few for itself. Squidward's voice came from behind them, calm, thoughtful. If this were an art exhibit, I'd call it The Sea Dreams of Harmony. Sandy turned her gaze toward the arches. Maybe it ain't dreaming, Squidward. Maybe it's remembering. Her words settled through the group like a gentle wave. Plankton hovered still, staring at the shifting lights. They moved with purpose, but not design, guided by something softer, something like emotion itself. The glow pulsed in time with his breathing. Every time he exhaled, the light dimmed slightly. Every time he inhaled, it grew brighter. "Karen," he whispered, "I think it's responding to me." Her voice drifted through the sound of the hum, not from outside, but from within the glow now. "It always has, Sheldon. The sea listens when you stop shouting." He floated quietly for a long moment, thinking about those words. Then, tentatively, he closed his eye and breathed deeply, letting go of every tight coil of thought, every trace of the old ambition that used to fill him. As he did, the glow around him deepened. The light spread outward, creating ripples that reached the nearest arch, making it pulse once like a living heart. SpongeBob noticed and smiled. "You see that? The sea's listening to him." Patrick giggled softly. "Plankton's talking to water." But this time, Plankton didn't roll his eye or argue. He just smiled, small and sincere. Maybe for once it's talking back. He floated higher into the heart of the arches. The light wrapped around him like warm silk, and the sound of the sea's hum grew deeper, almost like a voice made of water. The ocean wasn't speaking in words, it was feeling back at him. Every emotion he released, every trace of forgiveness, gratitude, peace, returned to him, magnified, echoed, and carried through the sea. He began to move slowly, deliberately not swimming, just drifting, letting his motion guide the glow, and the light followed. As he turned in slow circles, the light spiraled outward with him. It flowed from his path in arcs like ink trailing from a brush. SpongeBob and the others watched silently. The soft spiral of color spreading around Plankton grew into patterns across the ocean floor, luminous shapes that pulsed and faded like living coral. Sandy's voice came out in a whisper. "He's painting with peace." Squidward's eyes softened. "Now that is art." The light continued to follow Plankton's motion. He didn't plan his movements, he just felt them. Every turn was slow, thoughtful, guided by calm instead of control. Soon the spirals expanded outward, touching the arches, sending ripples of new color through them, soft emeralds and faint golds. It was as if the ocean was learning his rhythm and weaving it into its own. Karen's voice returned, clearer now. Do you see what's happening, Sheldon? The sea isn't rewarding you, it's joining you. You stopped trying to own the light, and so now it shares it with you. He turned slowly in the current, watching the glow move in unison. All this time, I thought creation meant control. Creation, she replied gently, is cooperation. The words resonated through him. For so long, his inventions, his dreams, even his failures, had been about trying to win. Now this quiet dance with the sea was something else entirely. No blueprints, no goals, just participation. Plankton lifted his arms and spun one last time. The motion sent a wave of light outward, cascading across the arches in perfect synchrony. The hum rose not louder, but deeper, like the sea itself was sighing with contentment. The others felt it too. SpongeBob's body glowed brighter. Patrick's giggle turned into a hum. Sandy bowed her head, and even Squidward closed his eyes, his usual tension melting into the rhythm. The entire ocean seemed to breathe with them. For a moment, there were no separate shapes, only light. All their glows merged into one wide pulse that filled the water, spreading far beyond Bikini Bottom, far beyond sight. The current that flowed through them wasn't one of power, but of peace, a steady stream that carried away all thoughts of fear or rivalry, replacing them with quiet belonging. Plankton felt tears welling up, though in the water they simply became more bubbles drifting upward. He whispered, voice trembling, I didn't know peace could be shared. It always could, Karen said softly. You just had to stop guarding it. The arches above them shimmered one last time, their glow turning soft white, not blinding, not bright, just pure and still. Then slowly, they began to dissolve, their light falling gently like snow. Each flake of glow drifted down toward the seafloor, settling across coral, rock, and sand. Wherever it landed, it left behind a faint glimmer, as though the sea itself was remembering every moment of calm they'd given it. The festival was changing now, fading from its bright chorus into its quiet refrain. The hum slowed, becoming lower and deeper, echoing through the ocean like a long, peaceful sigh. SpongeBob turned to Plankton, his voice soft. You started something beautiful, you know. Plankton shook his head gently. No, the ocean started it. I just stopped interrupting. Sandy smiled at that, her voice gentle as the drifting light. That's how the best things happen, when you finally listen. Squidward nodded, expression uncharacteristically serene. And when you stopped talking. Patrick chuckled, but even his laughter blended into the calm. Guess we're all part of the sea now. Plankton looked out over the fading glow. The arches were gone. The sea had dimmed to a soft silver, but the warmth remained, pulsing quietly through the water's steady, eternal kind. He realized this was the real festival, not the glow, not the spectacle, but the shared silence that followed it. The quiet connection that didn't need sound or light to exist. And in that silence, he felt something settle inside him. Not excitement, not ambition, but a deep and peaceful knowing. He whispered into the stillness, Thank you. And the sea, vast and gentle, whispered it back. The last traces of light drifted slowly to the ocean floor. Each fragment faded as it settled, leaving behind only soft silver trails like moonlight scattered through water. The sea had gone quiet again. Not empty, not dark, but quietly whole. Plankton floated still, surrounded by the gentle hush that follows wonder. The others lingered nearby, their outlines softened by the dim afterglow. SpongeBob's body shimmered faintly with leftover color, and even Patrick's steady breathing created small ripples that glowed for a moment before vanishing. The arches were gone. The shimmering pulse had settled, but the warmth still moved through the water, a warmth that felt alive, like the sea's memory breathing in rhythm with their hearts. Karen's voice came, soft and distant, like the echo of a dream half-remembered. "It's quieter now, isn't it?" Plankton nodded, his small shape glowing faintly in the silver light. "Yes," he said. "It's like the ocean's asleep, but awake at the same time. That's peace, Sheldon. Not the end of motion. It's the space between." He looked around, taking in the slow dance of the seagrass, the soft rise of sand where the glow had settled, the faint outline of his friends drifting gently in the current. SpongeBob's voice broke the silence, hushed and wondering. "I've never seen the ocean so calm before. It's like it's hugging us." Patrick smiled dreamily. "I could stay like this forever." Squidward gave a small sigh, but for once it wasn't a weary one. If forever sounded like this, maybe I wouldn't mind it. Sandy turned to look at Plankton, her eyes reflecting the slow shimmer of the sea. "So, Mr. Plankton, how's it feel? Your first festival of peace?" Plankton took a moment to answer. His gaze drifted upward where the last threads of light were fading into the darkness. He whispered, "It feels like coming home to something I didn't know I lost." Karen's voice hummed gently through the water. "You never lost it, Sheldon. You just forgot where it lived." He smiled softly. "And where is that exactly?" "In the space between what you wanted and what you already had." He thought about that for a long time. The Chum Bucket. The endless experiments, the half-formed plans, the rivalry that once filled every corner of his life, they all seemed so small now, so quiet, like echoes that had finally stopped bouncing off the walls of an empty room. And in their place was something simple, steady, kind. The silence deepened. Not heavy, but comforting, the kind that wraps around you and lets your thoughts rest. Far off in the distance, faint glimmers moved through the water, glowing fish weaving slowly through the sea. They seemed to follow invisible paths left behind by the festival's light, carrying little fragments of glow with them like fireflies. SpongeBob pointed toward them. "Look, the light's traveling." Sandy nodded. "Guess the ocean's sharing it around." Plankton watched the glimmers move farther away, soft trails stretching into the horizon, until they faded into the vastness. "So it doesn't end here," he murmured. "It just keeps going." "Exactly," said Karen. "Peace isn't a moment, Sheldon. It's a current. Once it starts moving, it never really stops." He closed his eye and let himself drift. The current brushed against him, gentle, cool, full of quiet life. He could feel it carrying the warmth outward, past them all, towards the places unseen. Patrick's voice was small now, sleepy. "Do you think the jellyfish feel it too?" SpongeBob smiled, his voice slow and content. "I think everything feels it, even the coral." Squidward folded his arm, still drifting. "If coral starts singing tomorrow, I'm moving." Sandy laughed softly, her voice barely above the hum of the current. "Ain't nothing wrong with a little harmony, Squidward." He rolled his eyes, but it was gentle, without bite. "Maybe. Just this once." Plankton turned back toward them, his gaze tender. "Thank you," he said quietly. SpongeBob blinked. "For what?" "For coming. For being here. For not questioning why." Patrick grinned sleepily. We never need a reason to show up for a friend. The word hung in the water, friend. It was small, simple, but it filled the space around Plankton like another wave of light. He'd heard that word before, of course, but never like this. Never with the quiet certainty that it was real, that it included him. His voice trembled slightly when he said, "Then, I guess I finally did something right." "You listen," said Karen. "That's all the ocean ever asked for." The others began to drift lower, their movements slow, their eyes heavy. The sea was dim now, but still filled with that faint, eternal glow, the kind that doesn't come from light at all, but from stillness itself. One by one, the sounds softened. SpongeBob's hum turned into a quiet breath. Patrick's giggle became a sigh. Sandy murmured something kind before letting her head rest against a glowing coral bloom. Even Squidward, reluctant as always, let himself float down and close. When the festival of light finally faded, the sea fell into a silence so complete that it almost sang. No bubbles rose. No currents stirred. Even the smallest grains of sand seemed to settle into stillness, as though the ocean itself were holding its breath. Plankton floated in the center of that silence. The glow around him had dimmed to a faint halo, no brighter than a memory. It didn't pulse or shimmer anymore. It simply was. For the first time, he realized that peace wasn't the absence of sound or struggle. It was presence. The presence of something vast, gentle, and infinitely patient. The festival was over, but the feeling it left behind hadn't vanished. It had changed form. It had become part of the sea itself, stitched quietly into the folds of water and time. He turned slowly in place, gazing around him. Bikini Bottom was nowhere to be seen. The Chum Bucket, the Krusty Krab, even the lights of Jellyfish Fields, gone. In their place was an endless field of soft, drifting particles, glowing faintly like starlight underwater. The seafloor looked like the surface of a dream, smooth, silver blue, and impossibly still. "Karen," he whispered. For a long while, there was no reply. Then her voice came through softly, like wind through glass. "I'm here." He smiled faintly. "Everything's so quiet." "That's what happens when the dream listens back," she said. "You've reached the part that doesn't move anymore." He blinked slowly, taking in the vast stillness around him. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full. Full of memory, full of meaning, full of rest. Plankton drifted downward, letting his tiny body settle onto a patch of glowing sand. It was warm, even in the depths. The warmth seeped into him gently, erasing the edges of his exhaustion. He remembered what it used to feel like, to wake up in the cold Chum Bucket, the hum of machinery rattling above him, dreams of formulas scribbled across the walls. He'd built machines, plans, schemes, everything to escape the silence. And now that same silence held him like a cradle. He let out a small, trembling laugh. "I was always afraid of this. Of nothing happening. Nothing." "And now?" Karen asked. He closed his eye. "Now I think maybe nothing was just peace in disguise." For a while, neither of them said anything. The silence grew deeper, but it wasn't lonely. It was as if the whole ocean had folded itself around them, like a vast blanket of lights. Then faintly he began to hear something again. Not sound exactly, but rhythm, a slow, distant heartbeat. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It wasn't his. It wasn't Karen's. It was the pulse of the sea. The same heartbeat he had felt during the festival, but now slowed, calm, eternal. He listened. Each thrum felt like a thought too big to understand, yet too simple to ignore. Every beat said, "You are here. You are safe. You are enough." He whispered, "I think the sea is dreaming again." It never stopped, Karen replied softly. "You just started hearing it." He smiled at that. "Do you think it dreams about us?" "Maybe," she said, "and maybe it dreams through us." Plankton let that thought sink in. The idea that every plan, every invention, every spark of imagination he'd ever had might not have been his alone, but shared, whispered to him by the ocean itself. He opened his eye again. The light around him had changed color, no longer silver blue, but faint lavender, fading into soft gold at the edges. The dream was warming. Somewhere above, faint shapes began to drift into view, gentle outlines of all the things he loved and lost. The Chum Bucket appeared, but not the cold metal one he knew. This version was made of coral and light, glowing from within like a seashell lantern. Its sign didn't flicker or sputter. Instead, it shimmered calmly. "Welcome home." Plankton floated upward, his tiny limbs moving slowly, as if through honey. He drifted toward the glowing building, and as he approached, he saw figures moving inside. SpongeBob was there, mopping the floor with rhythmic ease. Sandy was sitting by the counter reading a book of marine poetry. Patrick was asleep at a table hugging a sandwich. And Squidward was painting the wall, long, slow strokes that shimmered into color as soon as his brush touched it. Karen was there too, projected in the soft blue light, her edges faint but kind. When Plankton entered, none of them turned immediately. They just continued what they were doing peacefully, like a scene that had always existed. There was no hurry, no tension, only stillness made visible. SpongeBob was the first to notice him. He smiled, not with surprise, but recognition. "Hey, Plankton, you made it back." Plankton blinked. "Back?" Patrick stirred and mumbled, "You were gone a long time. We saved you a spot." He pointed to a small coral chair at the far end of the counter. It was perfectly sized for Plankton, glowing softly in the dim light. Plankton floated toward it, sat down, and for a moment just breathed. The chair felt like it was made of memory, firm but gentle, like the sea itself. Sandy looked up from her book. "How's the festival been?" Plankton smiled faintly. "It's still going. Just slower now." She nodded as if she understood perfectly. That's how it should be. Even light needs to rest. Squidward put down his brush and studied the wall he'd been painting. The mural depicted a vast underwater scene, ribbons of light weaving through coral, fish gliding through color. At the center was a tiny green figure standing under a column of glow. Plankton tilted his head. "That's, me." Squidward nodded. "You look better in color." Everyone laughed softly, their voices blending with the quiet hum of the dream. The laughter didn't echo. It folded into the silence like a drop of ink into water, leaving behind ripples of warmth. For a long while, they simply existed together in that calm. There were no clocks, no sense of before or after. Just an endless now. Plankton found himself resting his tiny arms on the counter, watching the soft glow dance along the coral walls. "I used to think I'd be remembered for what I built," he said quietly. "Now I think I'd rather be remembered for what I stopped trying to fix." SpongeBob smiled warmly. "You didn't fix the sea, Plankton. You healed with it." That word lingered in the quiet. Healed. It felt too big for such a small space, yet it fit perfectly. Outside, the sea's glow began to dim further, as if preparing for rest. The dream had grown tired, ready to sleep again. Karen's voice softened. The dream's almost over. Plankton nodded slowly. Then let's not wake it. He looked around the coral-lit Chum Bucket one last time. The soft laughter, the warm hum, the peaceful glow, and then turned toward the sea beyond the door. Maybe success was never something to chase, he whispered. Maybe it was something to return to. The words hung in the water like bubbles of light. He stepped outside again into the endless quiet. The sea was waiting, vast, patient, eternal. And as he drifted forward, the last of the glow followed him, wrapping around him like a soft tide. Outside the coral Chum Bucket, the sea lay vast and endless, painted in deep tones of violet and blue. The light from the festival had faded into soft embers now, drifting lazily through the water like the last fireflies of a summer night. Each shimmer felt like a thought, small, gentle, and fleeting. Plankton floated through them slowly, his tiny body leaving faint ripples in the stillness. He could no longer tell where the water ended and where the dream began. The sea felt weightless, timeless, as though he were gliding through memory itself. Behind him, the gentle hum of the coral Chum Bucket softened until it became indistinguishable from the pulse of the ocean. Every structure, every color, every sound began to dissolve, folding quietly into the background. He wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The fear that once clung to him, fear of failure, fear of being forgotten, fear of smallness, had drifted away with the glow. Now, smallness didn't mean insignificance. It meant belonging. He passed by a cluster of coral glowing faintly gold. Tiny bubbles rose from between their branches, floating up like whispered thoughts. He touched one as it drifted past. Inside the bubble, he saw memory, himself standing atop the counter of the old Chum Bucket, shouting orders to machines that never listened. His voice had been sharp, commanding, desperate. Now, watching it from within the calm, he didn't feel shame or regret, just understanding. You were trying, Karen's voice said softly beside him. You just didn't know how to listen yet. He nodded slowly. I thought the world was supposed to listen to me. Turns out I was the noise all along. Karen's voice smiled. If such a thing could happen. And now you're the silence. That truth settled in him gently, not as a loss, but as a transformation. He floated onward. The deeper he went, the softer everything became. Colors faded into misty grays, then into pure, lightless calm. It wasn't darkness. It was something beyond it, like the color of rest itself. As he drifted lower, faint shapes began to appear, shadows moving through the haze. They weren't frightening or solid. They were outlines made of memory. He saw SpongeBob's smile appear briefly beside him, then dissolve into a trail of bubbles. Patrick's laughter drifted past like a single, echoing note. Squidward's clarinet sound shimmered faintly through the current, slow and serene. Sandy's voice murmured something like, "Keep dreaming, little guy," before fading into the deep. One by one, their presences merged into the sea. Plankton could feel himself changing, too. His edges were becoming lighter, softer, less defined. He reached out to touch his reflection in a passing shimmer, and saw that his form was no longer solid green but transparent, filled with faint golden light. He wasn't vanishing. He was becoming part of the ocean. A thought rose in him, unbidden and tender. Maybe this is what success feels like when it's done pretending to be something else. He smiled faintly. Success without noise. The current carried him gently forward. Ahead, a faint glow appeared, a slow, breathing light. as if the ocean itself had a heart. He floated toward it, each movement unhurried. The glow pulsed once, twice, in perfect time with the rhythm he'd felt earlier. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It was the same heartbeat as before, the pulse of the dream itself. He realized then that this rhythm had always been there, under everything he'd done, even when he hadn't heard it. When he'd built his machines, when he'd failed, schemed, shouted, tried. The rhythm had been beneath it all, steady, patient, waiting for him to match it. Now, at last, he did. Each beat seemed to whisper a single word that grew softer with every thrum. Rest, rest, rest. The glow opened before him like a wide, gentle bloom. Inside it was no structure, no shape, just a space made of pure calm. He entered it, and the hum of the sea faded completely. There was no sound, no motion, no thought. And yet, there was everything. The ocean wasn't around him anymore. It was him. He felt himself stretch outward, not physically, but in awareness. His thoughts no longer belonged to one small mind. They drifted like light through the whole sea. He could feel the sand on the ocean floor as if it were his own skin. He could feel the current moving above, brushing through coral like breath through hair. He could feel the distant whales humming in slow unison, and the smallest plankton, his namesakes, drifting in harmony. Every piece of the sea pulsed with the same quiet rhythm. He realized then that the ocean didn't just remember him, it was him, and it always had been. All his life he'd tried to own something that already included him. He whispered, though his words no longer had sound. I was never apart from it. You never could be, Karen replied, her voice softer now, softer than the tide. You were made of it. The sea doesn't forget what it dreams. Her voice began to fade, dissolving into the rhythm. Plankton felt no fear, only warmth. The edges of his being continued to blur until there was no difference between him and the water around him. Every shimmer, every pulse, every beat carried a part of what he had been, and yet he was still here, everywhere. He thought of the Chum Bucket, of the lights, of SpongeBob's laughter echoing down the street, of the sea above and the calm below. Each thought flickered once, then folded into the rhythm. He began to hum, softly, instinctively. It wasn't a melody, but something between breath and thought. The sea responded, its pulse matching the tune. The song of the ocean grew, not in sound, but in feeling. It filled every corner of the water, reaching far beyond the dream, into the quiet hearts of every creature asleep in Bikini Bottom. Even SpongeBob in his pineapple house stirred faintly, smiling in his sleep. Patrick rolled over on his rock, murmuring something about sandwiches. Squidward's clarinet hummed a single low note in its sleep, and the sea kept breathing, slow, endless full. Inside that stillness, Plankton was everywhere, not as a being, but as a whisper of calm that the ocean would carry forever. He understood then that this wasn't an ending. It was continuation without movement, existence without need. Karen, he whispered one last time, if this is what silence is, I think I finally understand it. Her voice, now distant but smiling, replied, then rest, Sheldon. You've earned your quiet. He closed his eye, and the ocean exhaled. The current moved once, slow and gentle, then settled again into eternity. The sea carried his silence like a song. It didn't echo, it didn't fade, it simply existed, flowing through every current, every shadow, every sleeping corner of the ocean. Somewhere far above the quiet depths, Bikini Bottom rested in its own gentle stillness. The lights of jellyfish fields had dimmed to soft lavender. Even the jellyfish drifted slower, their tendrils glowing faintly in time with the sea's slow heartbeat. The world didn't know what had happened, not consciously. But every creature felt it, a faint warmth in the water, a softness in the air, a peace too subtle to name. Inside his pineapple house, SpongeBob stirred from his dreams. The world around him was hushed. The usual hum of jellyfish and bubbles softened into a tranquil murmur. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. His room was bathed in a faint, silvery glow. It wasn't moonlight, it was deeper than that. It seemed to come from the sea itself, filtering through his window like a sigh. SpongeBob tilted his head, smiling sleepily. Feels nice. He didn't know why, but a sense of calm filled him completely. It was the same feeling he used to get after a long day with friends, when laughter faded into tired smiles, and all that was left was warmth. He stood by the window, pressing his hands against the glass. Outside, the sea moved in slow rhythm, like it was breathing. "Good night, ocean," he whispered. And for the briefest second he thought he heard something answer, not in words, but in a feeling, a faint, familiar warmth brushing gently against his heart. Farther away, Patrick slept soundly under his rock. Usually he snored like thunder rolling through a cave, but tonight even his snores had softened into a kind of music. He dreamed of floating, nothing else, just floating in endless calm, surrounded by soft blue light. In the dream, he saw bubbles rising around him, glowing faintly gold. One of them drifted close, and inside it, he thought he saw Plankton smiling. Patrick giggled in his sleep. "You look happy, little green guy." The bubble burst softly, scattering light across his dream. Up above, at her tree dome, Sandy slept beside her open notebook. Equations and sketches of machines filled the pages, but her pencil had rolled away. The usual frown lines on her forehead were gone. She dreamed of coral lights and the hum of deep water, and though she couldn't quite recall the details, she felt a strange sense of fulfillment, as if someone somewhere had finally solved a question she didn't know she'd been asking. Her voice whispered into the quiet of her dream. "Guess peace don't always come from fixing things." In another part of town, Squidward sat awake at his window. He hadn't gone to bed. The calm of the ocean had kept him there, clarinet resting loosely in his hands. He didn't know why, but the silence didn't bother him tonight. He lifted his instrument, letting a single note drift into the water, low, slow, and soft. It wasn't a melody, just a breath put to music. But the sea answered. The current carried his note outward, merging it with its own hum. Squidward paused, surprised. He played another note. The water shimmered faintly, reflecting it back. He smiled quietly. Not his usual smug grin, but something real, unguarded. "Well," he said softly to no one. "Guess someone's finally listening." The note faded, and he closed his eyes. For a long while, the ocean above Bikini Bottom seemed to move as one great breathing body. Currents slowed and sand settled, and even the faint hum of electricity from the city signs softened to a rhythmic pulse. The sea was dreaming again. And within it, far below, deeper than anyone could reach, Plankton's essence shimmered faintly like a heartbeat beneath the waves. He was no longer aware of being separate. His thoughts had melted into the ocean's rhythm, flowing freely through every drop of water. Sometimes he surfaced as a faint memory, a spark of green light here, a soft pulse there, but never as a full figure. He didn't need to be. The sea had become his voice now. And every time a fish swam through the warm current, every time a bubble rose a little slower than usual, every time someone felt that small, inexplicable calm, it was him, whispering softly through the water. Rest easy. Keep dreaming. You're home. The words weren't words anymore. They were rhythm. They were peace. Deep in the ocean, near the spot where the old Chum Bucket once stood, the sea floor began to glow faintly. Tiny plankton, countless and bright, gathered together in slow spirals of light. They didn't know why they moved that way. They just did. Their glow formed the faint outline of something familiar, a tiny figure, arms raised gently towards the surface. It lasted only a moment before dissolving again, scattering into the current. But that moment left something behind, a soft trace, like a memory the ocean refused to forget. Above, SpongeBob walked through the quiet streets the next morning, humming softly to himself. He couldn't explain why he felt so light inside, so calm, so content. The Chum Bucket was empty. No lights, no noise, just the faint sound of the sea brushing against its walls. He stood in front of it for a while, looking at the sign. The letters looked a little different today. The sun hit them in a strange way that made the word chum shimmer faintly like coral. He smiled, touched the door, and whispered, "See you soon, Plankton." Then he walked away, letting the sound of the waves follow him. And though no one noticed, a faint glow appeared on the inside of the Chum Bucket's window, a small spark, flickering softly like a candle in deep water. It stayed there through the morning, through the afternoon, through the night, always steady, always quiet. The sea's hum continued slow, endless, and kind. If you listen closely enough, you might almost hear it whisper, "He's still here." He never left. And maybe somewhere deep in the dream, Plankton smiled. Not the grin of victory or invention, but the soft, satisfied smile of someone who finally understands what it means to be at peace. The ocean shifted once more, not with movement, but with awareness. Every ripple carried his calm outward, passing it through the reefs, through the caves, through the still blue heart of the sea. It reached far beyond Bikini Bottom, beyond the edges of coral and current, until it touched everything. Even the smallest fish paused in their motion for just a breath, feeling the warmth ripple through the cold deep. It was the ocean remembering, and dreaming still.